Good afternoon, everyone. How are you today?
Good afternoon.
Thank you. All right. Want to go around for the record and do introductions to everybody on the council for attendance.
Nathan Spencer.
Karen Ringe.
Michael Stevenson.
Sharita McCullers.
Tallulah Payomokaye.
Linda Wire.
Daniel Coleman.
David Eatman.
All right, thank you. Are there any additions to the agenda or any revisions to be made to the agenda today? Anybody have anything they want to add to the agenda? All right, so we'll go with as is. Just really quickly for chairman reports, I just have a couple things. I do want us to discuss new member recommendations. If anybody has a recommendation, I know that we need at least, what did we say, 2 to 3?
That is correct. Right now, we have one regular member shortage. So we have a 9-member board, and we're short 1 member there. Traditionally, the Transit Authority has carried at least 1 or 2 alternates, trying to keep 2 alternates in the wings at all times, just in case a board member, as we've had in the past, a board member moves, or we run through periods where people rotate off, just as we have recently gone through with 3 members rotating off fairly quickly. It allows someone that's actually been to the meetings and has come up to speed on issues and current events to be really in tune with the process and immediately come into a full voting function. Since we are in a area of change currently, just a reminder to the board, by municipal code, it is a 9-member board. So if you have a quorum of those 9 members, then those 9 members vote. If there is a shortage of a quorum of those 9 members, then the alternates become a voting. You bring on alternates by seniority until you have a quorum. So just letting you know how that works. We haven't really had to worry about that here lately, but as we move forward and we try to get new members as well as those alternates, just letting you, just quick reminder of what's in your handbook in that municipal code.
Okay. I also, well, good to piggyback on that, because I also want to discuss in the past, like just trying to be a little more streamlined with our voting procedures. I know that we have a lot of important things that we're going to have to vote on coming up in the future. So in the past, everybody who was on the RTA that sat here voted, but the way it's supposed to be is just that the members are supposed to vote. So right now, we don't have any alternates, but in the future, just to make sure that nobody can come behind and say that a vote passed that wasn't legit because somebody voted that was an alternate, I think that I want to bring it to the board to discuss following parliamentary procedures in that way a little more. What do you all think? Any discussion? Do I need to make a motion, or are we good?
I'm good.
Okay, awesome.
Sounds appropriate.
Awesome. The other thing, committee meetings. I kind of also want us to be a little more streamlined in our committee meetings. Right now, they're open to the public, and I want them to kind of stay that way, but I'm hoping that our community meetings, when people do come to them, that we have designated seating for public people when they come to the meeting, if that's possible. Does that make sense? Does it make sense? Or? Yes, yeah. And I know that's something that we kind of aren't implementing right now.
What do you mean? Because right now, people can either join us at the table or sit behind.
Right.
Are you suggesting that they all sit against the wall, or they sit at the table?
That they sit against the wall or in other seating. I think the table space should mostly just be for committee, staff, and invited guests. That way, it's kind of clear who's on the agenda, who is on the board, and it's also clear when it's time for public to make their input. Sometimes if we're not doing that, they can be chiming in at the table only because of placement. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
When sometimes it's actually out of bounds and it can throw off our meetings a little. Does anybody agree or disagree?
You say you don't want them sitting at the table, right?
Right.
Okay.
Do you have any feelings on that?
I have.
No, I'm fine.
You good? Okay.
I do have a question on that. Is the committee meetings have been fairly informal in terms of public chiming in on topics. that's not planned to change, is it? Or is that
No.
something you want to?
No,
Okay.
I want the public to be able to chime in. I want this to stay open meetings. I just want us to be a little more structured with how we're doing things as an RTA, especially with what's going on, the climate. I know we've all gotten calls from news, you know what I'm saying? So I just want it to be very streamlined, who's saying what and who's doing what when we're in our meetings.
Okay.
Is that fair? Okay, cool. Great. Would like to move on to, does anybody have anything else to add or just anything extra for the agenda or not? Nothing? Okay, great. So we're going to move on to approval of minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to review last meeting's minutes?
Yes.
If anybody would like to make a motion to approve them?
I make a motion to approve the minutes last month meeting.
I'll second that.
All right, it's been approved and properly seconded. Are we ready for the vote? Take that as a yes. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the motion passed for the minutes for last month. All right, and I know we have public comment at 4 o'clock. I don't have my phone on me, so I don't know what time it is. All right, so we got about a good 20 minutes. So we're going to jump into staff items. The first item on the staff is the review of governance and decision-making process, and that's attachment number 13. And I know that David wanted to talk about that.
Yes, so as we are now in or about to enter a new fiscal year, council adopt the FY20 budget this week. So that's good news. We're moving into fiscal year 20. With that, we have a number of new objectives, as you're aware, some new service changes, as well as some new exciting capital projects for Go Raleigh as well. With that said, this process that you have before you, starting on page, actually it's 14, 13, a little bit of a cover memo there, is really just a summary of all the different touch points that we have with authorizations. As you're well aware, we deal with a number of different organizations and also approval processes as we go through the flow. But generally speaking, this all starts, especially with most of our expansion, starts with the Wake County Transit Plan. And believe it or not, even though we'll just start the new fiscal year July 1, we will actually have our first discussions regarding the 21 budget in late August or September, early September, with the Wake Transit Plan, talking about fiscal year 21. So again, just trying to highlight those processes when we have touch points with the Transit Authority and those other bodies. I don't plan to go into great depth on this. Certainly staff helped put this together, and I appreciate their help with that. It may be best to digest this. We do have a bit of a downtime, quite honestly, between now and when we crank back up again in July or August, depending upon how we approach that. And we may talk about how we want to potentially have a meeting or some review of our processes in July. And I'll throw that out there as just as a thought process, and we can talk about that at closing statements maybe today about how we want to approach July. But again, I don't want to go into great depth on this. It might be good to just digest it and think about all the different touch points we have. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, then we can either come back in July or August and certainly address those in detail. Yes?
One quick question up front. This makes sense in the process, but this shows if everyone agrees to move it forward.
Correct.
I'm curious, and if staff can maybe send something along for us to look at, or just you can explain, if one of those members along the way does not approve of something, is there a process to appeal that or bring it back? Because if the RTA is approving of something and TPAC does not, or Campo does not, or Go Triangle does not, does that stop us from being able to have it in our city?
Yeah, so we can certainly bring back that information, and I think that the answer to that is, quite honestly, unfortunately, it depends. And what I mean by that is it depends on where it is in process, exactly how that would flow. So yes, we can certainly bring back that, and that might be something that we have. If we have more of a workshop type of a meeting instead of a formal meeting, that we can actually talk about that as well. We'll try to put that in a graphic. I'm not sure how successful we'll be, but certainly we'll be able to discuss that.
I have a question about the the flow. The public hearing that we have on proposed new services comes before the final vote of the Go Triangle Board and the Campo Board.
That is correct.
Can you remind me how far in advance we do that?
So for this last round of FY20, we either approved that in, I cannot remember, it was either March or April, and held the public hearing.
And then they vote, I think, in June.
They do vote in June.
So there's enough time to make revisions.
That is correct.
All right. I'm going to move on to if there are no other questions or comments, I'm going to move on to the next item, the development of the RTA bylaws.
All right, so I know this is going to seem
Oh,
like
sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The lighting policy.
Yes, so number 2, revision of the passenger amenity and bus shelter policy, and then part B is the lighting policy.
Right.
All right. So staff is requesting that the Transit Authority refer the shelter policy back to a committee of your choice. We said the Finance and Policy Committee. That is generally where policies have gone. But if that workload gets too heavy, the Transit Authority has, directed that particular item to another committee. So staff, we're neutral about what committee it goes to. But as we continue to implement our bus shelters, we've actually should be in fiscal year 20, we should meet our threshold for 25 boardings a day at every stop in our system will be served by a shelter. So with that, we know that there is strong transit authority as well as Raleigh City Council support for extending those opportunities to areas that are, that may not meet that 25 boardings a day. Our threshold below that currently is 10 boardings a day for a bench. We're not saying that's the right number, but that's just the next threshold we have. And we also find that from a staff perspective again, and from a design perspective, it's just as cheap for us to build, or put it this way, it's about 90% of the cost to build a shelter site as it is to just go ahead and a bench site, as it is just to go ahead and put up the shelter, quite honestly. At least about around 85%. The shelter cost about $5,000, and a good bench is going to cost you around $800. So you've got about a $4,000 delta in a $30,000 site between a bench site and a shelter site. So anyway, our thought process is that in those instances where we've approved a facility for seniors or persons with disabilities because our policy allows that waiver, we've gone ahead and just built shelter sites anyway. Again, I don't think that it would be prudent for us to just say 10 is the number. Staff will bring back data along with cost for several intervals between 25 boardings a day and 10 boardings per day, and then we can make a conscious decision about what next steps there are for our policy. Along with that, we've also heard from the Transit Authority as well as others that there is an interest in us being very deliberate about making sure we have adequate lighting at our bus stops. We don't currently have a policy on exactly how we judge which stops should have a particular level of light, or if all stops should have a particular level of light. So we would like that as part of this motion also to go forward so that we could develop those criteria to give staff some type of a benchmark to shoot for, quite honestly. There's a number of ways that we can reach that. We can reach that with solar lighting. We can reach that with working with Duke Energy. Again, we have opportunities to reach those goals. We just want to know what the goals are.
David, I may have misheard one of your first statements. I thought I heard you say we were anticipating in the very near future that all stops in the system would meet the 25 boardings a day threshold. Did I mishear that?
We will have a shelter at all stops meeting the 25
at all,
boardings per
okay,
day
but
threshold.
not all stops in the system will have met that.
Now,
20
that would equal about roughly 275 to 300 stops out of our 1,200 or about 1,250.
Okay, I misunderstood what you said.
That's what he said, though.
Okay. Well, I would just say we would, in the Finance and Policy Committee, very much look forward to reviewing these and updating them as the system does expand. And I think the thought of having adequate lighting at every stop for safety and perception of safety is an important thing, and we should be looking at it. I would even suggest that we might look at, as we're rolling out new shelters, that they may have integrated lighting. I mean, I think this is talking about ambient lighting, such as street lights, but maybe that's something that should be put on the table as well.
Yes.
How long do you think it would be before all of the stops had some sort of structure, a shelter or a bench? Because I do notice there's a lot without it.
So all transit systems are very similar in that 25% of your stops generate about 75 to 80% of your ridership. And that's pretty common. You have a large number of stops that have what we call, 2 or 3 offs or ons. And they are spread throughout the network. They're really there for convenience. But generally, passengers do polarize around, major residential, commercial, and employment opportunities, things of that nature. And so those stops really, float to the top. Some of our larger stops with just simple shelters have hundreds of boardings a day. But there are many, many stops that have 2 or 3 boardings a day. Certainly, that's something for the Transit Authority to consider. Do you want a facility at every single stop? And if you do, what would that facility look like? I would just say that, in my mind, I think that 25 boardings a day for our particular system is probably a little bit too high for us to stop installing shelters. I would also say
What do you mean too high?
that we would want to think that a stop that has maybe 15, maybe 20 boardings a day should have a shelter instead
wanna
of
lower
going
the
all the way
threshold.
up to 25. So lowering the benchmark, that is correct. So I don't know exactly, again, that's why we'll go into committee is to discuss if we look at each one of those tiers, we may have a tier that says, wow, if we choose that number, that's a $5 million investment. If we choose that number, it may be a $10 million investment. So what is the right investment level for where we want
Is
to
that
go?
funding available for us to have the latitude to juggle that?
We'll certainly have funding availability available at the committee meeting. So we can project what we have through 2027 through formula grants as well as Wake County Transit funds. Beyond 2027, we can provide projections.
So
But
you're just saying let's get as much as we can
Yeah.
between now and 2027.
So we can tell you what we can reasonably fund with our projections. Doesn't mean that you have to say that our policy, meets that exactly. I mean, you can have a more of aggressive policy, and then we can look for grants and other opportunities to fill the hole. So anyway, again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but we can discuss all that in
All we
committee.
do is weeds.
Yeah, I would be interested in figuring out what we would have to do, even if it's lowering the standard or the threshold for certain ones to get shelters and others that don't meet a mass, ridership or people getting on, at least having a bench. Because even if somebody's gonna stand there and it's only one person at the stop, they should at least still be able to be comfortable, which is in line with our mission, right? So if it's possible for us to look into us getting some, facility at each location, I would definitely love to talk about that. Do we need to make a motion for us to do something?
Just send it to a committee of your choice.
Okay, yeah, so I would love to send it to Finance and Policy.
I have a comment first, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say I'm really pleased that the staff has proposed this. I think it's definitely time to do a reassessment. I imagine other authority members have the same experience. I can't tell you how many people I talk to across the community who this is the thing people want to talk the most about is the lack of bus shelters. And I always tell them we are expanding the number of bus shelters, and there will be more coming with the Wake Transit Plan. But I think this is a really important step. So thank you for bringing it to us.
If we decide, can this go into the transit plan?
What we will do is, so the Wake Transit Plan has a amount of funds and a physically constrained financial model of what it plans to put towards shelters and benches. So we take that pot of money. We also take our formula grant funds along with the City of Raleigh's local match to those funds, and we put that money towards shelters also annually. And then we also look for discretionary grants through a number of opportunities to add to that as well. On top of that, we're building nearly, I would say, since within the last year and within the next 24 months, we'll build somewhere between 60 and 100 new sites as part of existing roadway projects. Our only cost associated with those projects is the shelter, the trash receptacle at the site. Because as part of the roadway project, they're installing those. And again, that's another reason we want to take it to committee, is because we do not use a policy for those roadway projects. Because once you are doing right-of-way, installing a sidewalk, the incremental cost for the small piece of bus pad for the bus shelter is a very incidental cost. So we're getting that as part of that roadway and sidewalk project. And then all we're doing is installing the shelter. For those of you seen the new shelters and the bench that went up on Pool Road, just west of Sunnybrook, that full stretch on the north side, that's what those shelters came from, was that sidewalk project along Pool Road there. Mm-hmm. So again, we're getting more and more of those projects to support us, and that's very exciting. So again, we'll discuss that as part of the policy, but we just need to think about those opportunities as well.
Well, just to clarify, when I asked about the transit plan and it being in there, more so not just for the funding, but for the word to keep us accountable, because I know that's our plan.
Yeah.
So if we're saying that we want to set a timeline for when all the stops have some sort of facility and structure, I would like it to be in the plan if possible, so that way we're not just saying it here and hoping that we make it happen, and we're actually holding, even if the authority changes, we're still holding to making sure that we get all the shelters.
And that may be something we address within policy. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to dwell on it, but as far as the new shelter design, I believe you reported that there will be 2 installed on Blue Ridge in front of the Art Museum.
That is correct. So we have one of the flat work sites at the North Carolina Museum of Art on Blue Ridge Road completed. That means that all of our sidewalk and ADA connections are there, as well as the shelter pad. We have a second site which was being graded, and I'm not sure if that's complete, but as of this week, that was under construction. They were forming it to pour the concrete. So that one should be complete, I would say, next week. Once those sites are down, which again by the end of next week, hopefully all the flat work will be completed. If it doesn't, hopefully it won't rain for 2 weeks. But anyway, once that's complete, we're just waiting on the manufacturer to deliver the 2 shelters, and I think we're with a 6-week delivery, and we're about probably 2 to 3 weeks into that. So maybe 3 to 4 weeks, just to give myself a little room. We should have a facility out there on Blue Ridge Road, or 2 facilities, quite honestly.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's almost 4 o'clock, and I know we have a couple people who've signed up for public comment. Can we just get this last item 3 and then take a pause to go into public comment if possible? Yes, ma'am. All right. So just going on to the next item, the development. Now we'll get to the item of the development of the RTA bylaws.
So hopefully the Transit Authority is aware that under, I think it's Article 4, Chapter 11 of Municipal Code, that defines what the Transit Authority is. It defines its powers, its duties, as well as staff's duties, for the ongoing operation of the transit system in the city of Raleigh. With that, it is quite short, though. It's about a page worth of information that defines everything that we do in somewhat broad terms. I know that there are several boards and commissions with the city of Raleigh that have developed bylaws that provide more detail on exactly how the organization runs and its processes and procedures. Currently, there is nothing that dictates the committees or the committee structures within the Transit Authority. That is all passed on by knowledge from one chair to the next chair to the next chair and of each committee as well as of the board. We as staff, to make sure that we have, we've got some great opportunities, exciting opportunities in the future. And as faces change and opportunities become available, we want to make sure that there's good continuity throughout that process well into the future. So I just think it's wise for us to have bylaws which lay out exactly the duties of the Transit Authority and something that can be available for new members as well as existing members, so there is that continuity through time. Again, we have some great examples within the city of Raleigh already with some of its boards and commissions. We would like to bring our first shot at that forward to the board for a committee's review. We don't think that we can do this in a couple of months. We think that this is a multi-month process because I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion about what should be in, what shouldn't be in, how much of municipal code should be restated within the policy, and we can go through all of that. But I think it is important for us to move forward again for the efficient and long-term continuity of the process.
What other groups have existing bylaws?
I know the
that you
Planning
mentioned?
Commission does, the Appearance Commission does. Those are two of the largest examples that we reviewed because they have very comprehensive bylaws. I think there are some other ones that do. What's that? Arts Commission does. So, quite a few of the boards and commissions do have the bylaws. And again, I just thought it would be a good opportunity for us to memorialize some of our processes and procedures that we have out there in place.
You said planning and who else? I'm sorry.
So,
Appearance Commission,
Who?
the Raleigh Appearance Commission. And then Brenda said Arts Commission. Who has a budget like ours?
Parks.
Do they have a bylaws?
I'm not against doing this. I'm just wondering what prompted it right now, and also I'm just concerned about how much time it's going to take of staff when we're already spending a lot of time building our staff for other things. And
We do not have a timeline for this, and there is no urgency. That is the only reason that we brought it forward now is because we're entering a new fiscal year, and we can put it on a staff work plan, and we can spend as little or as much time as each committee, whatever committee is assigned on that. So there is no predetermined schedule for this. We think that it would take a minimum of 6 months to thoughtfully go through and look at some examples and review of draft and think about how we may want to structure that. So again, we didn't expect to have anything until at least early 2020 at the earliest, and it could be later. So again, no predetermined date for completion. It's just something that we had been thinking about bringing forward for quite some time. And again, here we are at the end of FY19, entering a new fiscal year.
Well, it just sounds to me like if all these other commissions have bylaws, why don't we just, use those and edit them to be appropriate and not,
I think because we
Much time on it.
have a little more influence and power than the other groups. A lot of the other groups don't have the ability to control and award projects like we do. I think, wouldn't it be that the planning commission is the only one that has as much in terms of being able to manage the budget? David?
So, I think that certainly the transit, every board and commission is different than the other. So each one has its own unique opportunities and needs. And again, this is our existing code is very limited in what it spells out. And again, this is just the opportunity to memorialize. No timeline. Can we use an existing body's bylaws that we think are appropriate? Most definitely. We can tailor those to our needs, and I would hate to think that I had to sit down and write them from scratch myself. So certainly that is the intent, would be to take a great example and make it fit our particular needs very well. Again, there is no timeline on that. We'll provide maybe half a dozen examples at a meeting, and then we can go through with regular business. We can review that for 2 or 3 meetings. Then we can come up with, after we determine what type of framework we want or an outline, then we can come back with a draft at a later meeting. And hopefully sometime in fiscal year 20, we would have a finalized document. Again, no timeline.
So right now, it's only 3 that you can come up with that has the bylaws right now, right?
Well, 4, because Parks and Rec, you said.
Oh, Parks and Rec. So it shouldn't take that long to go over them. I agree with Ms. Karen that we go through theirs to see.
Do what?
I said I agree with Ms. Karen that we get a copy of all the ones that we have that has the bylaws, and we go over theirs and see what we can pick up.
So until we have a chance to look at what's existing,
Yeah.
we won't authorize staff to begin this process yet, until we
They could
become.
be beginning with bringing us the bylaws from the other clubs.
That'll be part of the committee process, most definitely, and you just tell us which committee you would like that to be in, and we'll be happy to put that on agenda, and we can review it as little or as often as the committee likes.
How long has RTA been in existence?
A long time.
20, 30?
I'm thinking it was the late 70s, early 80s, somewhere around the Mass Transportation Act.
I don't understand, he brought it for information. Let's mull it over, come back and and just think about it, because the question is, why now? Obviously, a couple of meetings ago, we had the riot act from that thing, kind of kept us in check. You remember? We had the attorney here, city attorney, or wherever he was, city attorney.
Well, I can personally say that that this is a David Eatman, now a little bit different, but transit administrator initiative. It is not tied to any event. It is not tied to any requirement.
Right.
It is only tied to some of the best practices of other boards and commissions within the city of Raleigh. And if the board would not like to move forward with it, that's fine as well. It is certainly a staff recommendation, and the board can either refer it to committee or table it or and decide not to pursue. But that is the honest truth.
So why not then policy and finance, whatever, look at what we have now, and then look at a couple of the other ones, and then come back and say what we have is adequate or what we have is inadequate?
I think the thing is we don't have any bylaws.
No, we have
We have an article.
Article 4, chapter, whatever,
Yeah.
and
that
which has been
defines
our
what we
bylaws.
do, But we don't have, the bylaws would be a little more rounded out, explaining, it told us that we were going too far, you know what I'm saying, and the city attorney wouldn't have had to come. to
It
explain
might
that.
not even do that, quite honestly. It may, but it would define that you have a marketing committee, you have a finance and policy committee, and you have a route committee, and that currently is not memorialized anywhere. There is nothing that states what types of committees you have or what types of committees, what actions they take. So we would develop that process for defining what your subcommittees do, how they interact to the board and the decision-making process. So, I mean, that's just some of it. Obviously, there's much more to I'm not saying that it wouldn't do that, but it depends, again, upon how detailed you would want that.
Well, how about we get a chance to look at what we have, and then we have this discussion, because we don't know. I've not looked at Article 4, Chapter 11.
You all would like to maybe table this until our next meeting?
Yeah, and then give us a copy of what we have now. Article 4,
Yes.
Chapter 11, whatever it is.
I'm sorry, just speaking for the Finance Policy Committee, I think would be useful if staff could take a little bit of time, review those 4 or so other boards and commissions bylaws, just maybe make a little matrix that say it addresses these 6 or 7 things, and just kind of give a high-level summary of what those bylaws cover, and then what we might want to be looking at. I think that would be useful and wouldn't be exhaustive that we had to read, voluminous documents.
That is those vary greatly. The table of comments on those vary from about 26 items to about 6 or 7 items. So you have some very basic and some very detailed. We have reviewed all the existing that we could find, I think, within the city and a couple of externals. But we'll be glad to bring back a general framework of the breadth of what they address. Most definitely, we can do that. And we can do that either to the full board or to committee, however you'd like to proceed.
Well, I would like it to the full board if possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that something that, are we suggesting maybe moving this and just having a further, more robust conversation we don't meet in July, right? So in August?
And we'll discuss July.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be
But
fine.
as far as having an RTA meeting?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, so I make that suggestion too, if we could get more information and just have it presented to us at our next meeting. All right.
So what's the resolution of the item?
So we're,
My interpretation is that staff will bring back a matrix of
Okay.
bylaws, table of comment or contents with the breadth of opportunity for a simple to a detailed.
right, of
Yes.
other people's bylaws, but also having an opportunity, maybe even if in the meantime, we can get a copy of Article 4, Chapter 11.
Yeah, so that is in everyone's handbook,
Okay.
and we'll also make sure we get that out via email.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so it is 4:12. We're going to pause really quickly and have a moment for public comment. Can I hit the gavel? All right, first person on the list is Dwight Spencer.
He's got a permanent spot on our list.
Oh, no. Please state your name and address.
Good afternoon, everybody, and my name's Dwight Spencer, 205 Fayetteville Street, Suite 220, and I'm going to be very quickly because I got to get out of here. But I'd like to pass this to the clerk here, and this is for review and not for discussion. Please go over it because next week it will hit the media outlet. I do want to say thank you for all this that we've been through over the past 8 months, and with the bus operators also thank you as well. And I'm going to say some because you have some bus operators wrapped up in management bondage. But it will be taken to the Raleigh Transportation, and I hope that city staff will make a great report to the Transportation Committee and divide the personal relationship with TransDev and them, and I hope that they give a great report to Transportation because we are still asking that the entire management, Ms. Marie Parker, Reginald Caldwell, Matthew McCall, and Morris Cook be replaced in order to move this transit system forward and to the level where it should be and where it's at. It will not move forward until that happens, and majority of the bus operators, I have put together a great research team, and on June the 20th, I will present my findings to the Transportation Committee. And this research team is working directly for me. And it is a very good team. So I will put that together, and the findings will be presented to the Transportation Committee on June the 20th to go to City Council for full vote to replace this management. Again, I want to thank you, and we must realize one thing. In order to have a great transit system, you must have a great leadership team. And I hope by the 1st of next month, Mr. David Eaton, if you don't mind, please, or either Transdev, the management, please, these bus operators, and put in a snack room, put in their break room, a soda machine, ice machine, water cooler, something of convenience. This is 2019, and we invested millions of dollars into a facility, and then the bus operators have a break room that they can't even go in for convenience. They have to run up to the breezeway to the two expensive stores on Wilmington Street to buy sodas and potato chips. This is 2019, and they have no soda machine, no snack machine, no ice machine, and no water cooler. That's ridiculous. Transdev management ought to surprise their bus operators by the first of the month and have that installed. Thank you so much for your listening ear. God bless each and every one of you, and I did commend the city council for putting together a great transit board this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next person is Terrence Dewberry.
Terrence Stewart, 8201 Old Dune Trail, Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I come to you today about something that was presented back in 2017. Was a workstation resolution where we asked for certain modifications to be made for our buses, and we think it's more important now than ever. We just had an attack on a bus operator in Florida that was fatally stabbed. We've had drivers spit on here in our system, and we're asking that part of that resolution was to put shields on the bus. I haven't heard it discussed in the physical plan or anything like that about what we're projecting. Let's include the drivers. The drivers need protection, women at night, early in the morning, just for safety reasons. And it's not that our passengers are all bad, but the national campaign right now about the safety of the driver, not one more. Not one fatality, not one more fatality has to happen if we can have retractable shields installed on these buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any opportunity to talk about that?
I can certainly answer questions where I can.
So how do we go about, especially with our new buses, making sure that definitely they're fitted, but go about making sure that we put something in place for safety for our operators on the current buses?
Yeah, so I would say with any equipment, we would need to do some research, obviously, and certainly we can bring that back to the full board or to a committee, and we'll do that at your choice.
Okay. Can we, I would definitely like for the research to be done for us to bring it to the full board in August to figure out what we have to do and how much it would cost to do that, and if there's room in what budget, and if we can use, I don't know if the same funds would be used for shelters or same space to get funds for that, but I think it's important for definitely important for our drivers to be safe.
Chair, can we also get an understanding at that meeting of what emergency services are in place? I know many cities have a communication button directly with police departments, or that set up audio that hear what's going on and go to operations. So I'd like to know what our systems look like.
Processes. We have a discrete button that they can push. Nobody on the bus can hear anything audibly. It goes straight to dispatch. It shows an alarm on the screen that says bus 1328 has emergency. It also shows across the front of the destination sign says call 911 emergency. Dispatch an attempt to call the operator with their run number so that they're not revealed. They'll give them 3 opportunities back to back in succession. If they don't respond, then they'll dispatch 911 and have a police officer meet them at their location.
Do you know how long that normally takes from the moment the button is pressed to the moment the police
Seems like
possibly
a
show up on
long-
average?
We've had very few actual, 98% of the time, most of them have been false alarms where somebody has accidentally hit the button and initiated an alarm. Our most recent one that I can think of, I think by the time the officer had gotten there, they had, but the time that it took the dispatch to respond is pretty quick.
When will we asking that? Because 3 drivers that actually got killed. They had cameras, they had an emergency push button, but they didn't have the shield. And the passenger reached over there and cut the driver's throat down the throat. And then you have some men that are beating on the women. By the time they push the button, they're off the bus. So that's why we're asking for protection.
No, I think we all agree with that. I don't think anybody is against definitely looking into
But
shields
sometimes
and
it
making
takes
sure
too
that
long.
we move forward to do it. But I'm just wondering what our whole policies are
don't
around
have the
emergency
button.
response.
Yeah, because I mean, a shield is good, but if someone's determined to get to you, I'm worried about
Yeah.
them getting to you, and I want to make sure that it doesn't have to wait 5 minutes for someone to attempt. I mean, my alarm on my system, my house works the same way. They'll call and ask whether I'm okay, but
Mm-hmm.
if I'm lying there bleeding out, I'm not answering.
Right. And then how
So-
long does it take for somebody? So I would just like to know, I mean, I know that most of the times it's a false call, but I would rather us be prepared to make sure that we're protecting the drivers, you know what I'm saying? Of course, I know that we all are on board with that, than be sorry, and we don't want that to happen here. So if it's a possibility, we can go over what our emergency response procedures are, the timing, and maybe even if that's something we're trying to put, I don't know if that goes in the bylaws, but, or if we could put together a policies and procedures document that goes with the bylaws, but some way where we can make sure that we're tracking what our emergency response is at every level and how we can improve it. Because I think if we don't and then something happens, that's the wrong time to find out we have.
We already have policy procedures that I'm glad to share with you.
Okay, please.
And all of ours is pretty rapid response internal, and then we dispatch 911. Of course, we don't have control of the response time.
Right.
Of RPD, but, I guess if you find any records that we have.
Possible? Okay.
Can
please.
bus drivers be armed?
No.
Okay.
I wish
I think we should do.
I was just
they
curious.
do that.
I don't think we should.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So,
Solely though.
do you want that,
Pepper spray or something.
do you want to,
Are they able to have like pepper spray or something, the drivers themselves on the bus to defend themselves? Are they able to have any sort of personal, not a gun, but like,
Deterrent.
You can't do
yes,
nothing.
yeah, so that does get into things that may require a bit of research and also consultation with the attorney's office on what's allowed and what's not. Certainly, there are parameters for city employees and their contractors in many cases. Personally, I think that's getting pretty deep into a lot of different discussions, and maybe not, but you may want to get that into a committee discussion where there can be some discussion on all of the different things. So we know we've got about 3 different areas of what we can look into currently. Certainly, we can provide general information on everything from what a shield is, some of experiences throughout the nation with them, and what they look like. We can do that coming up in August. It sounds like we want some information regarding existing emergency procedures along with response. And then we want information regarding what is legal as far as self-protection and things of that nature. So with that multi-pronged approach, again, that may be something that we want to take to committee first and then report back out. But certainly that is up to Madam Chair to make that determination.
I would like, since the committee meets before we meet, if that could be presented, maybe in finance and policy, because that would fall under that, and then have it on the agenda item for our full meeting with RTA in August.
We can certainly have that available.
Thank you. Do we go back into the regular, if there's any more conversation around it, or we can close out and finish our agenda? All right, so, I guess re-adjourning our meeting at 4:23. And if, I know that we just re-adjourned, but if you're available possibly for the policies and procedures meeting, so that you can give your input, that would be great too. Sit in the public section though. Okay, all right, so we're re-adjourning our coming back into our meeting, to our committee reports, route committee.
All right, so Route met this month, and we talked about
Mobile technology.
two specific things. We talked about mobile technology moving forward, specifically that staff is beginning the process of going out and setting up an RFP or a joint procurement for mobile ticketing. We discussed specifics on these passes and how this would go about. There's a lot not known yet. They're gonna go out and get bids from people, and then we'll have a better understanding or interest from different companies, and we'll have a better understanding. Major areas for this are the ability to fare cap within this technology. What it looks like is that the mobile technology capping will be if once it gets implemented will be available, and that the service capping is moving forward as well, but I think slower. But it does look like we will be seeing mobile technology coming fairly quickly in the next year. So we're going to be watching that in route committee and getting updates regularly. The second thing we discussed, which actually ended up being a much longer conversation, was the R-line revisioning. We discussed how the report, which is included, I believe, in our agenda, that we discussed the organizations that were selected, some of the topics that were discussed. Next committee meeting, we're going to talk a little bit further after we get a chance to go through some of it. There was an overall sort of feeling of not sure how to take the top choices, the top two choices, yet, and some question about whether it really serves downtown Raleigh in what it needs now. So there was a varying amount of conversation on that end. I think part of the problem is twofold. Out of the meeting, we discussed the fact that the budgetary constraints of the project were based on a tourism economic development focus, but there's also there was a set amount of money, and while it's been raised by inflation, it hasn't really been raised to service a larger need. For example, there are just 2 buses doing this right now. The other end is the fact that maybe what we're servicing now is not the same as what we were needing to service before. One of the items that I brought up, and I think sort of connects with this, is that we're not providing service now just to get tourists who come into the city around to hot sites and good restaurants. We're also talking about getting the people who are working at those restaurants in and around there and getting them efficiently around downtown. Quite frankly, everyone who's downtown. So there was a lot of talk of trying to re-look at that. So the committee is going to spend some time reading through the report and then going back to staff with some more opinions and more questions.
What are the two top recommendations?
The there were 2 options that were put in the report. One is, and if you look on...
Have some slides if it would be helpful too, just letting you know, so if you need any support with slides or anything.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
That might be helpful, actually. It's in the PDF that CJ sent out for RTA. It's page 28. But it is option 2 and option 4, which has a day and evening service. Thank you, Morgan.
Sure.
Option 2 was so giving some context. Originally, there was an idea to provide e-cab service as a standard bearer and a combination e-cab and bus service. The issue is that in order for it to fit into the budget that's allowable right now, it can only do 3 to 4 e-cabs tops at the current amount that we projected in the budget. So quite honestly, it doesn't really serve a whole lot of purpose, and we can't do all-day service with e-cabs, according to what we're finding with staff. So it bounced us back onto more either bus service or a combination service. What we found with the option 2, if you look, it serves now. One of the benefits that staff has sort of put in is that what they've created is a service that will go both directions now instead of one, and it will move faster, as you can see from the description on the slide. It's 17 minutes versus the current half-hour process to get from around destinations, or loop the service.
And the blue is the route?
The blue is the route. Some concerns that myself and others brought up are wayfinding in terms of getting to service, or, you know, there's concern that if it's put up in certain areas, are we, especially where there's residential, are we providing a cheaper free service to residents at a point where we're not really, you know, folks who have spent a lot of money to live downtown, are we no longer providing the service to the folks who need to be at those businesses versus the other? There's questions about how, you know, what time some of this will run. Is it going to be 24 hours? Stuff like that. So we wanted to go back and look at it. Yeah, who would be driving it is, as Sharita pointed out. The second choice was option 4, Morgan, if you wouldn't mind, which is sort of a combination. Daytime service would be that same route, and nighttime would be done by an e-cab service. Currently, as it's mapped, there is no connection between those two areas, though Morgan has mentioned, had mentioned at the meeting that there would be we might be able to set up a way to get from one point, you know, one section of the downtown to another. But a concern I personally had is that some of, you know, I think we didn't have a large enough group of stakeholders. I think we had stakeholders that were from specific attractions and things that have get a lot of response. However, I don't think that we necessarily got people like the small businesses in downtown that really were involved. The stakeholders were Campbell University, City of Raleigh's downtown, City of Raleigh Economic Development, Downtown Living Associates, Downtown Raleigh Association, the Greater Raleigh Visitors Centers, Go Raleigh, Raleigh Convention Center, RTA, Shaw University, Wake County Department of Social Services, and Wake County Manager's Office. I felt that there were some stakeholders that were missing in that, and from a brief survey of business owners and bicycle folks that I reached out to, there was clearly some unresolved interest in trying to figure out some options.
Sorry, what do these options achieve? What are the objectives? Is it faster service? They have more destinations? It saves money? I mean, what is the objective of this study and these recommendations?
Well, it's not save money, because I mean they're working within a small budget. They're trying to use up that budget. So I mean, if anything, more budget would actually be helpful. I think that they tried to achieve a faster service. I think that they tried to achieve things that were of interest for users. There's a
Meaning more destinations?
destinations and also points of interest and places to go. There was a process of deliverables that was put together by the stakeholder group of where people want to go, and priorities of different markets, and that was sort of how they narrowed down to a population, and then voted based on that to create which option would be better and which route would work best.
So these routes touch more of these destinations than the current route?
Yes, that definitely is true. And if you look at the different routes, there are circles and dots throughout it. Sorry, Morgan, I'm making you jump all over the place. The circles are sort of the reaches of certain destinations. The specific dots are morning, afternoon, evening, and all-day event areas or touch points. And specific locations are pointed out on those on that map to be touched by service. Basically, there was a lot of feeling that there was a lot to be wanted from this that wasn't quite covered, and trying to figure out a different way forward. Now, I will say that we're dealing with a small amount of money, so it's kind of like bringing duct tape and chewing gum to solve a problem. We're not talking, it's less than $1 million, I believe, isn't it? $900,000 per year to run service throughout the downtown core, getting around. And this doesn't even scratch the surface of looking at bicycle and pedestrian needs. So I think there's more work to be done, personally.
Has there been, I'm sorry, the people that are on the R line, have they been surveyed at all about their experience or their needs or the, experience, yeah?
Yeah, that was I believe, no, they really haven't.
As part of that particular, we had 2 different studies that did prior to this.
I didn't realize that.
But through this particular exercise, no. But we had done 2 prior to that had. We actually did some origin destination surveys as also. If you go back to the route option, it looks somewhat like a cane, quite honestly, or a candy cane. Some of the methodology for our existing routing structure is we run a big single-way loop. And we tried to do, or put it this way, when we first implemented that downtown, because of the entertainment district being around the convention center, as far as conventioneers, things of that nature, as well as lots of employment along Fayetteville Street. And then the only true restaurant district that existed being around the Glenwood South area. You could somewhat do a loop and be successful. And back when we implemented that route, we had average hourly boardings of about 20 passengers per bus hour. So for every bus hour that was out there, we gained about 20 passengers. Over time, as downtown has matured, Restaurants have spread out throughout downtown. So has parking and infrastructure and employment. Those numbers began to drop because people didn't depend upon the R line to travel from the Fayetteville Street District to the Glenwood South District for those many activities. So the big loop became, to many, and it is today, inefficient, as in it may be very wise to take it one way, but it's inconvenient to take it the other. So we looked again, we surveyed all of our, of the work group there, and Morgan, please help me if I'm wrong. But we came up with, what are the priority destinations and origins, throughout the downtown area. And we plotted those on a map, and we looked at those in many different ways in the downtown area. Then we tried to figure out if we wanted to really make sure we hit as many of these as we can, but we keep a bidirectional service and we try not to do too much with the resource that we have available, what would that look like? And so we came up with the candy cane route that you see there. And the progression of Wilmington and Salisbury is very quick from the Convention Center or South Street all the way to Peace Street, as those signal progressions are pretty quick through that corridor. You can get from the Convention Center to Peace Street literally in a matter of minutes, depending upon the number of stops. We have a large, currently the bike share program has a large progression of trips from the west side of Peace Street, or the east side of, or from Peace at East, or not at East Street, but about Blunt Street, that is, all the way over to West Street and Glenwood Avenue. So we brought the route over knowing that we have a large amount of development happening on West Street, and we have a large amount of residential on West Street, where we may have people that want to reach shopping and other retail opportunities that are developing at the intersections of Peace and West. So you almost have two routes that make up a single route. For somebody that's at the Convention Center that wants to go to the Glenwood South District, that trip around Peace Street, quite honestly, is as fast, or nearly, I would say it is as fast or faster than going a crosstown trip and making that east-west jog and then coming up west, just because of all the signal synchronization between South Street and Peace Street. And then that segment on Peace is not the fastest in the world, I admit, but then once you're at West Street, you really are in the heart of the district. Also traveling again further down south on West Street, again, we're picking up a lot of new development, and that particular route could go further south in the future and serve new destinations even further south with that particular alignment. So again, you're serving bidirectional service on West Street. You're making a critical east-west and west-east connection on Peace Street. And then we have what we think of as the museum and state government connections along Wilmington and Salisbury. So we think that, we were looking at all of those different variables, and this particular alignment just kind of popped out at us, and it hit many of the opportunities and defined origins and destinations that were out there. And that's kind of how we ended up with it.
So if I interpret it right, it goes southbound on West, makes a loop, and then goes northbound on West and back
Correct.
across. I'm just curious if there's really not much on the northern end of, is that Dawson? The southbound leg?
What's that again? I'm sorry.
Salisbury.
I'm sorry, Salisbury. The north of Jones Street, there's really not any destinations.
There's government complex.
North Carolina
Yeah, but it's dead after 5 o'clock. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's
not.
the museums and
Just a
all
quick
outside.
question. I wonder, instead of doubling back north on West, if you would come east on Jones and then down. I wonder if that'd be a more efficient route.
I was going to ask the same thing, because especially with what you're talking about and adding to what Nathan said about how we don't want to, how some of these areas are developing, they may go residential, and we don't want to give people free rides on the bus that aren't going to areas of attraction. So, and it would be my suggestion to maybe make sure that while we're redoing the R line, that it's more focused in areas where where nobody's really living, you know? Because we don't want it to go down, well, in my opinion, it going down West Street and there's houses there and people pick up the bus, the R line in West Street and ride it downtown to their job, then they're getting a free bus ride back and forth.
I'm really worried about the optics on that.
So
personally.
maybe us making sure that as we do this, we focus away from into more business development areas and areas of entertainment and attraction, and keeping in mind that things are changing with our area and development.
But that West Street is the Union Station.
It doesn't go that far south.
Doesn't,
on
that
this.
square wasn't Union Station?
Nope.
So we did a word cloud and asked everybody, when you think of downtown mobility, what do you think of, and what do you want that to be? Within that word cloud, the word free didn't really, I think it's page 22 of your handout. Word free really didn't pop up, so I think that we're out to lunch, and we really haven't even discussed that yet, of will this service be free or will it be a regular Go Raleigh fare?
Right.
We don't have an opinion on that yet. We want to make sure that we work through the routing and through our other budget initiatives. We know that with free, we're not going to get any fare box recovery. So we're starting at a worst case scenario as far as routing goes. So we want to make sure we hone in on that first, and then we project something that we know we can implement, and then we can make that fair decision. But as we went through all of our stakeholders, that really wasn't something that was overarching that they saw as something important. That did not pop out of their things that they listed as top priorities for downtown mobility.
So you're saying the R line, we are considering making putting a fare on the R line instead of.
I would say that we have not determined whether
Right.
the R line would remain free or not.
With so much stuff under construction, I think the general consensus was, let's just do something status quo pretty much now, and in 2 years, look at what's out there with all the units that are coming online, and see, like some people build apartment complexes, they don't put in the sidewalks until the people moved in, and then they see all the foot patterns, and that's where they put the sidewalks. Let's see what the foot patterns are before we firm this thing up any more than we have.
What's the current timing on terms of the goal of when this should be implemented, and about how long do you think this is a plan for, since we know things might change with the downtown transportation plan and BRT?
Yeah, so certainly we think that once we get implementation of the downtown transportation plan, where there are opportunities for high-frequency corridors downtown, that we'll have to rethink this. So again, probably a good 3 to 5 year plan of how we might be able to address mobility downtown. Maybe a little bit longer, but probably 3 to 5 years is realistic. But
So whatever decision we make, it's really not for that long.
in the grand scheme of services, considering that the existing service has been out there for a decade, that is correct.
Yeah, and considering that we all know that the existing service has been plummeting in terms of ridership, I would encourage us to move forward with a decision based on input so far, then keep kicking this down the road if it's before we run. I mean,
We'll
it's not going to be for very long anyhow.
Well, it's if we again, I'm just putting options out there. Depending upon how we move forward today, we would at a minimum be coming back to the route committee with additional recommendations, regardless of how we move forward today. We have to think about things of: is this an electric bus? Is this a CNG bus? Is this what does that vehicle look like? Is it part of the Go Raleigh normal network, but with some other special signature? So lots of things to think about. We want to be able to at least go back to our partners with some type of messaging in near future so that we can move forward. Again, I don't know what the board's thoughts are, but we'll be prepared either way to come back.
I think there was a lot of interest in the route committee to digest this and then take another stab at this with recommendations. Pieces like, for example, the fact that it doesn't go down to Union Station, maybe that fixing stuff like that, maybe going across Jones at certain times. I think those are things that we need to decide before we turn on, service just because it's service.
I agree, and I also think that it's important that the people who use the R lines' voices are heard
Agreed.
in this process, while we're deciding what's useful and what's not. It's one thing, I'm wondering who those people are then, who went to the public meetings. Are they people who ride the R line? Are they people who don't but would be interested if you did this for us? So, having that mindset, and maybe also in the different options, again, being more focused on making sure we're careful not to go too far into areas that are developing into residential if we're gonna keep it free.
Agreed. Yeah. So that's the report from Rep.
So the first one pretty much holds the status quo. Pretty much, right? I forgot the numbers. Huh?
No, neither reflect a status quo.
They're all there.
Oh.
David, just to address one of the points that will be raised, is there a precedent or model where daytime is pay, and then for equity issues, but nighttime it's free because now you're really serving the businesses and restaurants?
I like that.
I can't think of anything offhand, but I'm sure that there are many different programs out there. I've heard of a variety of past programs that could accommodate those types of opportunities, put it that way. So that's something that we can, as we get into further refining this is our first crack at reporting this back out to the full board. So we can certainly review those options.
Michael, think about the conversation around Clearscape's development scheme and the people that are going to be living downtown. You almost wonder, why are we considering a free thing anyway, kind of, sort of,
Well, I do think the discussion of the R line goes back to the original idea, which was to spur a downtown development, provide transportation alternatives. And so we're in a new era. It's probably worth a new discussion as to what is the purpose of it.
So what do you think? Do you think Plan A, don't get me confused here, but do you think that one there is the one that we sort of need to hang our hat on, or what?
Honestly, I find the graphics so confusing. I'm still trying to figure out what we're looking at, and so I'm not ready to make any recommendation.
It's a little hard to hang our hat on anything, again, if we haven't spoken to the people who ride the bus.
Well, is this thing designed to provide that opportunity for input? That, I mean, at this stage of the game, have you not tried to reach the people, or
Again, we did in 2 previous studies. This was an exercise with stakeholders.
Yeah.
So this particular element was not. Once we know a general direction, we'd be happy to go out and try to be able to tell, individuals what we have and what we would like to do. But at this point, we don't know what we would like to do. So once we know what we would like to do, we can relay that, and we can try to get feedback and how we might be able to further refine that.
So when you go back to the people that, I think it's 10,000 people rode last month, or you had 10,000, whatever that number was here. Is that 10,000 divided by 30? Did you have those many people per day, or how do you interpret that 10,000 number? It's on one of these pages back here in the back. But anyway, you have so many riders on the R line. It was 12,000 last year.
You would divide that by the total days of operation. That is correct, to get an average daily ridership.
Right, so then so do we go back to those riders? And then how do we give them something that's not as confusing as what we're just looking at? I mean, how do you ask them that question?
I think once we take a breadth of opportunities and narrow it down into either an option or a couple of options, because we started broad, we started with a blank sheet, a blank chalkboard, and really went through goals and objectives, and again, naming priorities for origins, destinations, and trying to set the framework for what it is that we want to accomplish. The steering committee did a great job at that. That's not an easy task. I think, had they 6 or 7 meetings, was it?
It was,
So, well, it's right in front of us. It's meeting
Sorry.
7. So,
7
yeah, there was
meetings,
7
correct.
meetings. And that's you know, that's challenging to think about holistically about taking a service with all of these wants and needs downtown and developing something. So we came up with options. We started with, you know, it's a blank slate to what you see today. We'll continue to refine that until we come up with a final product. But if we could get a general direction on or a recommendation, certainly you've seen staff's recommendation from the report you have before you. You don't have to make a determination today by any stretch of the imagination. We may have a opportunity to meet again in July and then a formal meeting in August. So again, this is our opportunity to present it to the body and start a discussion. It sounds like we started a healthy discussion, and we'll be glad to take this and move forward with additional information as needed.
Will the root committee be meeting in July?
So we don't have a meeting scheduled for July. We take a break after this. We don't meet again until August. But we were discussing an opportunity for those who wanted to, for us to have maybe a work session. It doesn't have to be on a regular RTA day. We can pick a day and have a work session where we're able to sit down with staff and talk to them about different ways that they come up with this planning and things like that. Work through some of the other things that we were speaking about earlier today if we wanted to have a session where we actually got together and went over some other little details and maybe got an even more understanding of how things work so that when we are making decisions, we're more informed and knowing how the decisions are made or how this is put together. That's an opportunity for the board to decide. It's something we can vote on. If you all want to have like just a work session sometime in July, maybe do a lunch and work session or something like that.
The question that you're putting before us in the last 5 minutes is the fundamental question that's in front of this whole train that we're on here, is the people that are using the system now versus the stakeholders that are making a recommendation for the system in the future, and how do we give the proper weight to each population group and making the decision going forward, which is a daunting task. I mean, it's land use along the BR, all this stuff is how do we weight those different population groups in making that decision. And the way that we glean the information from the people that ride, I haven't heard a clear enough process yet to figure out how do we get their opinion if we're asking them either or. Do you like this or do you like that? And how do we, and you know, we know they can evaluate what they have, but how do we get them to be able to evaluate the proposal when we're even looking at it, and we've been doing this now for a little while, and it's a little confusing for us when we're looking at the maps. So this is a very tricky question that we have to answer, and I would like to know when we're getting the riders' input that they're making as fair assessment of the situation as possible. And I just don't see that model in my head yet of how that question is going to be presented to them so they can give us sound feedback to be able to weigh their position against the stakeholders.
Can I?
We have the opportunity to ask them the same questions in a sense that we're asking the stakeholders and not presenting them with.
But we're not going to be there asking them.
Right, now I'm hoping that this is what we're doing, like, and not presenting them with the models yet, because we're still trying to figure out what's what, but having a conversation with them about what are their needs, what are they not getting, what stops, what extra stops do they need under the guise of why we did the R line.
But we don't have that. I thought you said you went to them first.
No, they didn't. They haven't
This
talked to the
process, we
riders.
have not. We did we did surveys with two earlier R-line assessments.
Right, well, what was the data that you got then?
I don't have that with me, but
Because that could be
I
the base. That could be a baseline right there. I mean, if they went there from the beginning, what is it they wanted? I mean, it can't be changing that much.
Yeah, because I have some questions about coming to them and saying, which model do you like better? It's nothing like what you're riding now. I don't think that's fair.
Right.
If there's information in the assessments that tells us what their interest is and what their destination and how they're using it, that could be very valuable. But unless we have something like that, we're basically, what we're doing is we're replacing it, and we're telling those riders, your opinion isn't.
Your opinion doesn't
Well,
count.
you know, I don't like that. So maybe you can get us the old data and we can look at it. Because we're taking a leap of faith here, but the more the platform we are taking a leap of faith from, the more sound that is, the better it is for us.
I think there's a way to kind of put this all together because, first of all, there were 7 meetings with stakeholders, and that shouldn't be tossed out. That was a lot of valuable time and a lot of staff work and a lot of analysis, so that's worthwhile. I do think we ought to look at past data from existing riders in terms of, because what the first things you ask them, it seems to me, is blank slate. What do you want? What are your needs? So you look at that, but I also think, you know, for me, as I've been following this process, I have been eagerly waiting to see what the map looks like so that I can now react to it. And I would think if I were a frequent user of the R line, it would be helpful to say, based on all of the input, we've come up with a couple ideas. What do you think? Do you like this? Do you not like this? Do you have a different plan? Do you have a different idea? And maybe you can survey them. These are some options based on what we've heard, but what's your reaction?
I think it's an opportunity for us to interact with the riders on a couple occasions, right? Like, I think going back to historical data is good, but I also think that, how long ago was that? How long ago did we do that?
There was 2 different studies. One was, I think, 2 to 3 years ago, and the other one was probably 4 to 5 years ago.
Okay, so I think it's worth us having some sort of surveying on the bus, like having a person on the bus, just getting some information, and then we bring it back, since we already have the stakeholder information, put it all together, and then go back out to the riders and say, because we already know what the stakeholders want. We've had 7 meetings with them. So going back out to the riders and not just resting on something that we talked to them about like 5 years ago and saying, hey, here's
or
what we
2
came
years
to.
ago.
Yeah, 2 to 5.
I find, we can provide that
Just
information.
the route hasn't
and-
changed, and it's.
But the
Yeah.
riders have changed is the thing.
I don't-
The riders may have changed, right? Those same people from 2 to 5 years ago may not be the same people that's riding on it now. Or their reason for riding might have changed.
Yeah,
because
so
of development.
downtown has changed, so, certainly when we think about the R line, you can't really think about it like a Go Raleigh route.
Right.
The R line is not a Go Raleigh route. The R line is a downtown mobility tool that is specifically for that particular market. It was developed for conventioneers and for downtown economic development in order to provide mobility where it didn't exist before.
And the livable streets model that we were
yes.
creating at that time.
Yeah, so, but downtown has just changed tremendously. All those origins, destinations, and the needs for those origins and destinations has changed.
Well, those are all valid points, and we should have already been surveying them, I think, as part of this process, because I'm not against hearing from the riders. Of course, we need to hear from riders.
Yeah.
It's just, we got to do that, and then we got to go back and assess it, come up with another map, bring it back out. This is months down the,
Yeah.
if not another year or 2.
So it will take some time. It will most definitely take some time, but again, we'll proceed as directed. I would say that through any of our planning processes, whether it's this one or whether it's development of regular fixed route services, that generally we have goals and objectives that we want to meet when we put out a service. With that, as transportation planners, we're going to use everything from census tract maps to other relevant data to help us develop the most efficient and effective service that we can. And we're probably going to have some alternatives of that route. But we're going to provide the public with alternatives because it's very difficult for someone that knows what the R line is, and certainly for someone that doesn't know what the R line is, to judge what I want or how to determine what one option is versus another option when when that's not there or available. So again, it doesn't have to be today. That can be during a July work session, or that can be in August. But our goal is to help us refine, from these options as something that we can take forward through some final steps for implementation. as we think about that, I mean, we've got realities of what type of vehicles and the lead times for that, as well as on the, infrastructure on the ground that has to be in place. So this is not a speedy process, I'll have to admit. We want to move quickly, but we also want to be very responsible, through that process. So this does not have a distinct timeline.
Let me ask you one final question. The Downtown Alliance, they say have that special overlay tax district, right?
That it would be correct.
And has that tax district has not changed, right?
I am not aware of a boundary change.
And really, the original R line was to pretty much service that tax district, special tax, they were paying a special tax. I know they weren't paying for the R line, but they were paying a special, they were being taxed above and beyond everybody else.
So they still are.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, they don't provide revenue to the R line currently.
But this was
I
done
don't
to.
remember back in 2009 whether we used the tax district's boundary or if we used our standard downtown boundary, because those two don't necessarily line up exactly. But I could go back and probably find out.
I'm just curious, okay. Whatever you want to do, Madam Chair,
Are
All
we
ears.
all interested? Can we take a quick vote on who would be interested in having a work session? Now, everybody doesn't have to be there. So those of us, I know some people probably have vacation already planned for July since we're not around, but if we can get people there just to have a little extra information, I think that would be.
well, do you want to do it like that, or do you want to see if we want to bring it back to the route committee to kick it around any more than we have already?
Kicking it around in the route committee that needs to be done?
I mean, I'd like to have them come back to us with drivers, assessment from the riders and your ideas from here and what they have to be able to formulate a better understanding of what any of this might look like.
So you all would rather go over this in route instead of like special session? Okay.
Is that, how does that
I'd
work for
rather
you?
us use special session for some of the bigger
Issues. So
issues
you
that
all
we've
may be
got.
still interested, just not talking
I
about this.
definitely.
That work for you?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
All right, so if we can bring this back to the route committee in
All right.
August. Oh, yeah, August.
Okie dokie.
Okay, so then the next committees, finance and policy did not meet.
If I could, real quick, I don't mean to dwell on this. As we move that item forward, we may need to meet with route committee. We can wait until August, or we can try to get some form of a meeting together in July. I'm having a little bit of a hard of a time formulating the onboard survey for this. So we're certainly going to want input on what that particular body's wants or needs are from that survey. So
I mean,
I'm
I'm around pretty much all summer, so I live this very.
if we
exciting
can, we
life.
may get a doodle poll out through the chair and go from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
And it could be something that maybe we can have some ideas to think around before the work session and just carve out 5-10 minutes to just throw ideas into it.
There's
that
so
they
much
can-
going on, I don't know how we can take any vacation on this stuff anyway.
Yeah, pull it together and then route, have a deeper conversation
Well,
around it.
I think it would also be helpful if you were clear on what you wanted from staff for us to review before the meeting, so that we're,
So we want
Productive.
the 2-year
I can
survey.
put together an
yeah,
email
survey that's
for-
2 years old.
for folks. Yeah.
Yeah. My thought is that the survey and then, of course, getting some assistance so we can get some of the questions for the new survey for the bus. And that could be something we'll do at the work session. But I would like to see the survey. So if anybody else, if you want to put together an email about
Yeah.
some of what we discussed here and shoot it out, that'd be
Absolutely.
And can you bring, concerning the ECAB, I would like to have more information on that, because you stated you have to, you was gonna, rent that out or get a contract out
So the information is in your packet about ECAP.
for all, about the contract, or who you gonna
Well, we
rent it
wouldn't
out
have that
to?
information until we actually did an RFQ or RFP for that, so we wouldn't be able to have that information for you. The only thing we have is the information about how much it costs, or probabilities of of that range that we were able to get just through inquiries for some of the electric companies that were able to give us some information.
And all that is going to be in the budget.
But that's already in your
Within-
packet now.
In our packet.
Okay. Okay.
Any other
Because
discussion?
everybody didn't have a full package. Thank you.
All right, so we'll move on. Thank you, Morgan.
No problem.
We'll move on. Like I said, Finance and Policy Committee did not meet. Marketing Committee met on June 6th. Do you want to do that, or you want me to do it? You wanna talk about it? Okay. Me and Linda were the two honored guests on the Marketing Committee who were at the meeting. We went over a couple different things. We talked about the New Bern Avenue BRT Public Engagement Plan. I know that there are some questions. I know I have questions on the Public Engagement Plan. They gave it to us, but there were some questions that we discussed prior to about the street signs and things like that, and how they're going about actually reaching out to the community to get them engaged, the different roads they're taking to do that. So I know that we wanted to discuss that. And I also wanted us to talk about, I actually added an item really quickly, I'm sorry. I wanted to discuss the RFP for the communications position and see if we can get an update on where we are possibly hiring somebody for that. I know that is gonna help out a lot with the outreach. That's outreach to the stakeholders and outreach otherwise if we can get that communications position that we've been working on filled. Not the RFP, but the communication position. So I did want to discuss that, and us actually having an opportunity to talk about if we do a work session in July, making the BRT a part of that conversation.
In the route committee?
No, the work session.
Work session.
Oh,
That all
oh,
of us would be a part of.
So two different meetings.
Right, so
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
All right, I'm just
Yeah, I'm just
putting
making
it in
sure
my
that I'm
head.
clear, too. So if we are interested in doing that, I'll send out a doodle poll for everybody who is interested. David will help me pull it together about the work session in July, and I definitely want us to put a lot of energy into discussing the BRT.
Not that it would be difficult to do, but just we just need to have about a week's notice. Since there is the opportunity for a quorum, we'll go ahead and make sure we advertise that as a public meeting.
That's the
but
work
we have to put-
session.
That's correct. So,
Go ahead
because
and
if
take a
they're,
vote now then, if we want to do that,
Yeah.
go ahead and take a vote.
I'm
whether-
fine.
All right, so let's go ahead and,
So are we still talking about marketing committee, or are we just?
well, it's all under the marketing. I put it under marketing committee. This is more so the July meeting, so we'll know where that falls.
So
on
the
stuff.
July meeting's only about marketing?
No, the July meeting is a work session about a lot of different stuff.
Okay.
Since it's been brought up throughout the agenda, I want to go ahead and get it
Okay.
out the way, and for us to go ahead and vote to decide if we want to have a work session in July.
I vote in the affirmative.
All right, so,
I would,
Make a
I'll
motion
make a
about whether-
motion
okay,
for a
yeah.
work session to happen in July.
thank you. It's been
You already
moved and
got my
properly
vote.
Seconded. Are you all ready for the vote? Okay, awesome. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so it's passed that we will have a work session in July to discuss some of this.
So we're kicking item C, which is in the item C's issue now has been moved over to a work session committee of the full body, full
No,
board.
No,
still
we're gonna still talk
discuss,
about this.
Yeah, this public engagement plan here,
Okay,
but deeper discussion on the BRT
a deeper dive.
will be in July at our work session.
Okay, all right.
Is that fair to everyone?
I like that.
Okay, because it's information and we're getting long, but I know that that's something that we're all very passionate about, and I want us to be able to have an opportunity to really sit down and talk about that. All right, so the public engagement, they did give us this information. It was brought to us by, is it WPS? WSP? Yeah, we were trying to figure out what that meant. They said they didn't even know.
I don't think it means anything anymore.
It
I
used to
think
mean something, and now it's just the letters.
Ah, yes. So they presented this work session, work plan, engagement plan to us. There are some questions on it. They said that this is definitely changeable. This is not in stone. Any ideas or suggestions that we have to bring to them so they can add it to this plan. I am interested in knowing how they're going about getting information out to the public.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, yeah, just real quick. I am interested in knowing how they're going out about getting the information out to the public. And I'm also interested in knowing about how, honestly, how diverse their team is, because that applies to how they go about getting information out, especially with our diverse ridership that we have. So I'm interested in those two things personally, but did anybody have anything to add to?
Well, I have a question of who's going to be running communication. Is this a team effort, meaning more than just Go Raleigh, or who's going to be in charge of this, and who's going to be part of it?
You
Well,
mean the
I-
consultant versus staff?
No, I mean partners.
Yeah, like, are we supposed to, like, are you
I'm
also
talking-
about the communications
I'm
role that
talking-
we're talking about?
All of the players involved. Are we talking WSP? Are we talking Go Triangle? Are we talking Campo? Are we talking
Who's involved?
who?
For those that attended the June 6th meeting, it will be very much the same. All of the same staff members from all of the departments of the city of Raleigh will be there. Some of the roles will change, obviously, with that. But we'll have housing neighborhoods, we'll have planning, we'll have economic development, we'll have transportation, we'll have certainly, I think we will have some of our partners over at Go Triangle there in a support role, as
When you
well
say
as.
there, what are you talking about when you say they'll be
Yeah.
there?
If we're talking about the June 26th meeting,
No, I'm talking about like in general. This plan is for public involvement.
that
going
is
forward.
correct. So you're talking
So,
overall.
Overall, how does this structure work? We have, who's every structure has to have a person that they answer to.
That's
so
right.
who's at the top? How do we go down? Give me a visual of the organizational chart on this one.
I think that certainly the plan itself is an execution tool for the execution of certain activities. So from a responsibility standpoint, it is a transportation project. So at the end of the day, this is, a transportation project. So we are in charge of that. With that, we have consultants which are certainly assisting us with project development through the development process of 4 BRT corridors. With that assistance through the implementation of the plan, we have the assistance of our communication staff in transportation, and that falls under the director. I think you met him, Mr. Rob Murray. We also have our communications office, which was at I believe was at the last marketing committee meeting, which has been helping us tremendously in this interim period as we staff back up. Beyond that, as part of the Wake County Transit Plan, Go Triangle receives funding to help support the objectives of the overall implementation of the Wake County Transit Plan. So we certainly want to leverage those individuals to help us in any way we can to execute this. That's certainly our key players and who's responsible at the end of the day. This is a transportation project, and its execution depends upon us and falls on us. So I'm not sure exactly what else you can
Is that the answer
that you
you were looking
need.
for, Nathan?
If you need something more, we can try to certainly get that to you.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if we're using Go Triangle staff, because they're getting paid by the Wake Transit Plan, does Rob Murray from Communications call up Go Triangle and say, hey, can you guys post something on Facebook? Or does Go Triangle say, hey, we got to get this event together, and starts doing what they do independently of the city's process of passing something up through communications to hopefully get posted before the event happens?
I think that we would certainly want to always know what our partners are doing. That doesn't mean that it would have to flow through our complete process, but certainly we talk on a daily basis, and we want to at least know what's going on so we're not surprised by anything. I hope that answers that question.
Okay. I
you're
think it
saying
would be
that-
helpful to have something in writing that goes between the organization.
But the city of Raleigh is in charge,
That is correct.
and everyone else is working for the city.
I mean, we have been, again, we are the project sponsors for this project, and so we're taking the lead in making sure that all of the communication is appropriate. That's why certainly Go Triangle has certainly different processes and procedures for dissemination of information than we do, but we just want to make sure that as they do that, that we understand what that is before that happens.
Excuse me, after you, Karen.
Thank you, Danny. My comments in looking at the plan, I think there are, that WSP put together for the city to implement and Go Triangle to implement. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. I mean, obviously, in terms of reaching out to the press and social media, preparing information for the public to look at. I think there's one area, well, I have two concerns. And the first about the plan is, I feel like the big area that we're missing in this plan is touching community organizations along the corridor.
More than just the CDC.
I mean, I think the CACs obviously are very important. And of course, and I know that our staff is, goes out and meets with the CACs regularly. Obviously, disability organizations, very important. But there are a lot of community, and the businesses, very important. But I think we need to have people on the ground going out and meeting with the Raleigh Wake Citizen Association, with the Voters Education Coalition, with the Friends Committee, among others. And really having conversations, because as I have said at meetings in the past, I think one of our biggest lessons learned from the failure of the light rail project in Durham and Orange was we somehow missed, there are a lot of reasons that failed, but one of the big areas that didn't work was the people-to-people communication with key leaders of all types, and so that people are really being heard. I know for the BRT meeting, I think I was told we sent out like 25,000 postcards to residents and businesses along the corridors. That was great. We should keep doing that kind of thing. So that kind of thing, there's a lot of good stuff here, but I just think that people to people, going out, asking for meetings with groups is really important. And that is also why, as you mentioned, to Lilipay, that because Raleigh is supposed to be implementing, we are missing 2 staff people. And we've had this conversation, the sooner we can get those people hired who are communications and engagement people, we're asking a lot of our planning staff already, and they can't do everything. And I know that we've got a consultant, but they are not as familiar with the community as our planning, as our city staff is, right, and as we are. So that's really, I think those are my 2 main comments.
So I guess that does segue me into the question I had about the position for communications. I know that we've had to repost it. Where are we, I guess, on how close are we to hiring somebody or starting that process?
So we did post once. We went through a number of candidates there. Unfortunately, we were not successful at securing a candidate through that process. We are reposting that as quick as we can, and that has been submitted for reposting. I don't know the exact day that it will be out. It could be as early as tomorrow, but certainly I think it would be out next week, if not tomorrow.
What was wrong with the original candidate? Were they not qualified for the role?
We were very excited with the candidates. At the end of the day, I think that with the unique challenges that we have facing us, and I would say that those are also unique and great opportunities that, we're going to have to be very thoughtful about who takes that role. It's going to be such an important role, as it will oversee not only much like our own public information officer and public engagement lead, it's going to be overseeing our existing marketing positions as well as our transportation demand management staff. Not everyone has experience with travel demand management. Trying to find that right, sweet spot is difficult. We are rescoping the job description, making sure that we put in some key elements that we think we're missing the first time that will hopefully allow us to be more successful.
I'm trying to be diplomatic about this. My concern is that we want to apply for this 30% in 3 months. We're not going to have this position on board and fully up by that point. And we've got communications from the city that is overwhelmed, and rightly so. I mean, there's a lot going on. I'd like to see, I like this document as a public involvement piece and outreach, I couldn't agree more with what in terms of getting out to what Karen was saying, in terms of getting out to the actual community. And if we're talking about using those FTEs from Go Triangle, I would like to see some way that we can do that without hobbling their access and controlling it. We just need to have people on the ground at Bible study on Wednesday at Martin Street Baptist Church talking to folks. It can't, I love Mila, I love the engineering staff and the planners. It can't be those people. It's got to be communications who's out there and saying, this is what's going on and how can we help and how can we work through some of this. So I just don't see another way to doing that other than calling for help, honestly.
I'm going to say, I go back to the last presentation that Mila made here. I think it was something about to the effect that the citizens want this. That's the piece that we're forgetting, that's the caps up the whole thing, is that the citizens want this. And so, and they want it now. And that's the way, that's the marching orders that David has, and that's the way the stuff has been moving along. And when that is those are your marching orders, and that's the way things are proceeding, a lot of stuff has to be sacrificed. Now, do we think the sacrifice is worth it? But I'm telling you, staff and council are hearing this thing that the people want it, and they want it now. Who those people are, don't know.
The
But we hear-
voters who approved the referendum,
I got
Danny,
it, I got it.
53% of the
I
whole
got it.
county,
But-
and the majority of people in Southeast Raleigh
Okay,
voted
so
for this.
I'm sorry.
Well, then if the
We
majority of
can't
people in
speak
Southeast
for,
Raleigh,
yeah, no,
why-
let's not do
why
that.
are we even
Because
worried
the
about
majority
it?
of Southeast Raleigh don't even come out when it's time to vote. So we can't say that these people are speaking
that's
for
what
the
Karen
majority.
just said
But
is-
that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
To his point, we don't know who the people are that's saying we want this and need this now, because when Mila did the last presentation, she said one meeting had 12 people, another had 5, there was 2 somewhere. So that led us to the conversation of making sure that we're getting the word out so that the community can be heard, because the people who show up to those meetings screaming yay, hooray, could be the people benefiting and not the people who will be affected. So we can't jump to say the majority of Southeast Raleigh, because that's not.
But
is
see, that
not
takes us
correct.
right back to the R-line discussion.
Incorrect.
See, all these things, they're kind of connected.
So we just, my hope is that we be mindful about the fact that we are making a lot of decisions here that are affecting a lot of people's lives and livelihood. And that includes whether they're able to get to the hospital, get to work, all of that, get home, all of that good stuff. And sometimes we're making those decisions without all the information. Sometimes we're blindly saying yay or nay without knowing who showed up to what meeting. And sometimes we're not doing our due diligence to make sure that we have the community out to the meeting so we can get a clear understanding of what the community wants. And instead, we're going off of what people who do show up and already want it are saying. And then we're letting them speak for the ridership when that is not the case, and that's actually a falsehood. So our hope here is that as we go forward, my hope here is that as we go forward, we're doing more to make sure that the people who are affected by the changes we make on the bus, that their voices are being heard and we're speaking to them and not diminishing that or making light of it at all.
I'm going to tell you, Steve Lyons of Steve Lyons Funeral Home is a member of the New Bern Avenue Corridor Study, which is like the Blue Ridge Corridor Study. At our meeting today, Steve told the group that he was trying to expand his business on New Bern Avenue, and he was trying to buy a couple of lots from the city of Raleigh that surround his property. And he told us that the city of Raleigh was giving him a very hard time in acquiring those lots. Now, that's problematic. And these little stories like this are running all through the community. So to the point that the chair has just made, you know, that's out there. But to the point that Karen made, there's this overwhelming thought that the voters voted it up, they want it now, and the fine tuning we're doing is really hurting the process of getting it done and getting it done now. We have to evaluate where we're going to fall out on that line of how this thing goes forward. But that's the reality of it. You know, some of this stuff, sensitivity stuff, it might get thrown under the bus. No pun intended. You know what that's where we're at.
Yeah, and I'm for us taking our time, and if we got to go back and redo it, I'd rather people be inconvenienced than people's livelihoods be jacked up. Messed up, excuse me for the notes. So, any other discussion on that?
I think we had a wonderful meeting.
All right. So if there are no other discussions or comments, and I don't have any, we'll go ahead and adjourn because we're already.
Actually, I did have one comment, which is, I think at our meeting a month ago, we talked a lot about putting yard signs up at the
Yes.
bus shelters for upcoming public meetings, like the next one on June 25th, and that would be, I don't know if that was done, but I didn't see it in the plan, and I thought that would be a great way to attract riders to come to the meeting on the 25th.
Yesterday, they were all on the 4th floor, and we were putting those out today and tomorrow.
Oh, wonderful,
Good.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, when I say putting all of those out, we are trying to keep those at shelters where we have easements, because we can't put those, we have to be careful where we put those, put it that way.
Uh-oh, he appears.
Tomorrow morning.
So,
And those
Yeah.
are going along the corridor, right?
that is correct.
And
They'll go
around
along the corridor.
the residential
Certainly
areas.
where we have shelters, benches, things like that, they'll go. But we'll just be making sure that we're very careful and mindful of where those signs are placed.
Okay.
Madam Chair, wonderful meeting.
Thank you. Are all hearts and minds clear? We're about to go ahead and adjourn, if so.
I think so.
We'll adjourn this meeting.